Ted Cruz, running for re-election to the Senate.
Do you want to introduce yourself, or like I'm Ted Cruz, or does that work?
I mean, you tell me what I don't know how you guys are.
Okay, that works. Okay. Why should Texas send you back to the U.S. Senate for another 6 years?
When Texans elected me to the Senate 6 years ago, I promised I'd fight every day to cut taxes, lower regulations, produce more jobs, that I'd fight to secure the border and to protect the Constitution and protect the Bill of Rights. I've kept those promises. And today we have lower taxes, lower regulations, more and more jobs, and we're seeing strong, principled constitutionalists on the federal courts who are protecting our rights.
So you'd argue we're better off than we were 6 years ago?
By any measure, Texans are better off today than we were 2 years ago. You know, Ronald Reagan in 1984 famously asked, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" Well, on that test, the Texas economy is doing phenomenally. Right now today, Texas is producing 33% more oil than we did in 2016. Right now today, we have the lowest unemployment rate nationally in decades. We have the lowest African American unemployment that has ever been recorded since we began keeping the data. We have the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate that's ever been recorded since we began keeping the data. And we have the lowest youth unemployment in 52 years. When you cut taxes, you cut regulations, and you unchain small businesses, Texas does great.
Some have been critical of your opponent, that he hasn't accomplished much in his time in Congress. Tell us specifically what bills you've led. What have you accomplished?
So in 2012, Beto O'Rourke and I were both elected to Congress on the same day. We both served 6 years in the United States Congress. In that time, I've passed 32 pieces of legislation into law. Legislation covering the gamut. Legislation including barring terrorists from receiving diplomatic visas and coming into the United States. Legislation mandating that the soldiers who were murdered at Fort Hood by Nidal Hasan receive the Purple Heart after the Obama administration refused to give them the Purple Heart because they called that attack workplace violence. Legislation reauthorizing NASA, extending the International Space Station, protecting property rights in space, and helping create thousands upon thousands of jobs in the commercial space sector here in the state of Texas. Legislation allowing states to require drug testing as a condition of unemployment benefits. If you're on drugs, you're not able to work and you need to get in treatment and get back on your own feet. Legislation as part of the tax bill that expanded College 529 savings plans so that they now include K through 12 education, so that parents and grandparents, you can save in a tax-advantaged way for public school, private school, parochial school, religious school, up to $10,000 per child, your choice. It's the most significant federal school choice legislation that's ever passed. And it passed 50-50 on the Senate floor, with the Vice President breaking the tie at 1 in the morning. Legislation directing the Defense Department to implement for the first time ever space-based missile interceptors to stop ICBMs from North Korea or Iran. Legislation designating North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism. And in the wake of Harvey last year, legislation creating over $5 billion in emergency tax relief for victims of the hurricanes, providing the relief Texans need. I'm proud that over 6 years I've been able to bring together Republicans and Democrats, pass 32 pieces of legislation that have had a major impact on jobs in the state of Texas.
Speaking to some issues now on guns, of course, we had the Santa Fe High School shooting this year. What is the solution to protecting our kids in school?
Santa Fe High School is about a half hour from my house. I was at home the morning of that shooting. I got in a truck and headed down to Santa Fe that morning. Spent the entire day at the school with the students, with the parents, with the first responders. It was horrific. This is wrong, and it has got to stop. There's a lot we can do to make our schools safer. The number one most important thing we can do is more armed police officers in our schools to keep our students safe. Beyond that, we need to look at hardening the physical infrastructure. We need to look at things like shrinking the number of entrances into a school. If you go to a bank or a courthouse or most government buildings, they have 1 or 2 entrances. And yet schools sometimes have 10, 20, 30 entrances. We need to shrink the number of entrances, look at things like potentially metal detectors and x-rays where it's appropriate in that local school, and also harden the physical infrastructure, things like doors that can't be shot through. In both Santa Fe and Parkland, the murderer shot through a closed classroom door, murdering students on the other side. There's a lot we can do, and I'll tell you, in the Senate, I've been leading the fight to get all of that done. Starting in 2013, my first year in the Senate, I introduced legislation that would have provided $300 million in funding for school safety, $300 million that could have gone to hiring police officers, that could have gone to metal detectors, that could have gone to strengthening the physical infrastructure of schools. My legislation got a majority vote on the floor of the Senate. 52 senators voted for it, including 9 Democrats, the most bipartisan support of any of the comprehensive legislation. But sadly, Harry Reid and the Democrats chose to filibuster my bill, demanding 60 votes so it didn't pass. If that had passed, that money would have been available, and it might have meant federal police officers could have stopped these horrific tasks. But we need to keep working to ensure that our kids are safe.
Nothing with addressing gun laws.
You know, that's every time we see one of these mass shootings, congressional Democrats and a lot of folks in the media, the immediate place they go is gun control. The immediate place they go is wanting to go after the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. That doesn't work. I'll tell you, the day of the Santa Fe shooting, that afternoon, I was in the hospital visiting a number of the students who'd been killed. I was visiting with one young man. About a dozen students were in his hospital room. He'd been shot twice. The governor and I were both there. We asked them, we said, what's the answer to this? Every single student from Santa Fe who was in that classroom said, gun control is not the answer. They said, if you take our guns, it's not going to make us any safer. It's just going to mean the murderers and killers are the only ones who have guns. I mentioned that in 2013, I had legislation to provide $300 million in school safety funding. The Democrats who filibustered it, they didn't filibuster it because they disagreed with it on substance. They just had a political agenda. They wanted to go after the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. That's their objective. This is a race where there's a real difference. My opponent, Beto O'Rourke, is proud of the fact, he campaigns on the fact, that he has an F rating from the NRA. That is a very good fact if you're raising money in Hollywood or from liberals nationally. But I don't think that reflects where Texans are. Texans understand that we should protect the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens, and we can do all of that while making our schools safer and coming down on criminals like a ton of bricks. That's what I've led the way to do in the Senate. That's what I'll keep leading the way to do.
On immigration, while it's not in the headlines maybe as much, child separation still very much in the midst. What have you done to help the situation? Families should not be separated. Every one of us should be able to agree, Republican or Democrat, that the right place for a kid to be is with their mom or dad. I've introduced legislation that would mandate families must be kept together, that would end family separation. But there are 2 ways to do it. There's the way many of the congressional Democrats, like Beto O'Rourke, want to do it, which is mandate that you release everybody, that you release the adults, that anyone that's apprehended crossing into this country illegally, you let them go. And that's how they keep families together. That's wrong. That doesn't make any sense. That only encourages more and more illegal immigration, which means more and more kids are going to be abused by human traffickers. Anyone concerned about compassion, about humanity, shouldn't want to see even a single little boy or single little girl in the custody of a human trafficker. Instead, the legislation I've introduced has said we will keep families together. We won't separate kids from their parents. And what we will do is keep them in a secure detention facility that is safe and double the number of federal immigration judges so that we can expedite their proceedings. They can bring their claim, bring it quickly. If they have a valid claim for asylum, that claim should be granted and they should be given relief. And if they don't have a valid claim for asylum, and many of the people coming here illegally don't have valid claims under current law, then that claim should be denied. They should be put on a plane as a family and sent back to the country from which they came. That is a humane and compassionate way to do it that also respects the rule of law. Now, for several months, I've been negotiating with Democrats, in particular Senator Dianne Feinstein from California, trying to see if we can come to common ground on this legislation. If we can get behind 2 simple principles, keep families together and follow the law. If we can get behind those 2, we'll have bipartisan legislation that'll pass. Senator Feinstein and I have gone back and forth on revisions of the bill that I filed. We're not yet at agreement, but I hope that we will. And I'll tell you, if we don't get there,
the impediment will be congressional Democrats deciding they'd rather have a political issue to campaign on rather than fix it, because we've got a solution that can prevent family separation right now, and all it will take is Democrats coming to the table and agreeing, let's solve this problem.
Your stance on this appears to have shifted. When you were quoted as saying, when you see Democrats saying don't separate families, what they're really saying is don't arrest illegal aliens. Now, shortly after that, you said all of us are horrified by these images. What changed for you?
So the media likes to tell that story, but as John Adams famously said, facts are stubborn things. Look, I think it is horrifying that we have kids in custody. But this is not an issue that I discovered suddenly in 2018, as many of the Democrats and many of the media did. I've been to child detention facilities down in Brownsville, but I've also been to child detention facilities in 2013 and 2014. Under President Obama. I've been to Lackland Air Force Base, which the Obama administration stood up as a detention facility with thousands upon thousands of kids. You didn't see the Democratic politicians bringing reporters in when it was President Obama who was locking up those kids. And the reason we see kids coming in is because of lax immigration, because of amnesty, because you asked those kids, the Department of Homeland Security asked those kids in 2013, 2014, why are you coming illegally? And they said, because I get a permiso, because I get amnesty. If I get here, I get to stay. Now, let me tell you, when I visited Lackland, I visited with Obama administrations and the Health and Human Services Administration, who described how these kids were being horribly abused, physically abused, sexually abused, the conditions these kids were coming in, the traffickers who were bringing them in. They're not well-meaning social workers. They are vicious, transnational, global cartels. They're heroin and drug smugglers, and they're human smugglers, and they do horrible things to the kids. And so, yes, the Democrats' approach has consistently been amnesty and release illegal aliens who are apprehended. That's the wrong approach. It ends up, you know, if you look back to 2010, 2011, there were roughly 6,000 unaccompanied children that came into this country. Then in 2012, President Obama issued his executive amnesty targeted at those who came as kids. And the number of unaccompanied kids went from 6,000 to, in 2014, 90,000 children. 90,000 little boys and little girls being abused, being in the custody of human traffickers. That is wrong. We need to stop it. And that's why I'm working to pass legislation to protect kids, to keep families together, but also to stop illegal immigration. I think most Texans agree that we can stop illegal immigration. We can also remain a country that welcomes and celebrates legal immigrants. People like my dad, who in 1957 fled Cuba with nothing, with $100 in his underwear. He couldn't speak English, but he came to Texas seeking freedom. There's a right way to come to this country. You wait in line, you follow the law. That's the right way to come, and I think that's where most Texans are.
You alluded to DACA, and in fact, a poll from Fox News shows strong support for keeping DACA and giving Dreamers a settled status. How do you solve those who came here through no fault of their own?
I think the first priority on immigration needs to be fixing our broken border, needs to be securing the border. I think the American people are rightly skeptical of politicians who keep promising more and more amnesty and yet never stop illegal immigration. When it comes to illegal immigration, I think we need to do all of the above. We need to build a wall. Yes, a wall is an important part of stopping illegal immigration, but it's not everything. In addition to a wall, we need technology. We need fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft. We need infrared. We need boots on the ground. We need to triple the U.S. Border Patrol. And I have to say, I think amnesty, a pathway to citizenship for those here illegally, I think it's a mistake. I think it is wrong. We need to have legal avenues for people to come here who follow the rules. We should not be encouraging people to break the rules. And listen, on immigration, there is no race in the country with a starker divide on immigration than the U.S. Senate race here in Texas. As for me, I'm honored to have received the formal endorsement of the National Border Patrol Council, the union of the men and women who risk their lives every day defending us and securing the border. My opponent, Beto O'Rourke, opposes a wall, and he has said that he thinks we have too many fences and walls as it is, and we need to tear down the border fences and walls that we have. He supports sanctuary cities, and he has said he is, quote, open to abolishing ICE. When he got pressed on that, he doubled down and said, maybe instead of just abolishing ICE, we should abolish the entire Department of Homeland Security. That's a radical and reckless view. That doesn't reflect where the people of Texas are. And if you want to look at immigration, I'll point to one specific issue on immigration that shows the clear divide between Beto O'Rourke and me. Cates Law. I'm the author of Cates Law in the United States Senate. Cates Law provides that violent felon illegal immigrants, aggravated felons, who repeatedly enter the country illegally have a mandatory minimum prison sentence so they're not let go. As you know, Cates Law was named for Kate Steinle, beautiful young woman in California who was murdered by an illegal immigrant who had been deported over and over again. He'd been in prison over and over again. He'd committed multiple felonies, and yet he kept being let go. If Cates Law had been on the books, Kate Steinle would still be alive today because her murderer would have been in federal prison instead of out on that California pier taking her life. The overwhelming majority of Texans agree with Cates Law. 70, 80%. The majority of Republicans, but not just Republicans, independents, libertarians, Democrats, Texas Democrats, who aren't in Washington and Congress, but who are Texans living in our great state, agree with Cates Law. But Beto O'Rourke voted no on Cates Law. And that's the National Democratic Party has gotten so extreme on immigration that it doesn't reflect the common sense values of where 28 million Texans are.
Speaking of the wall, much of that would go right here in Texas along the southern border. Wouldn't that require the use of eminent domain and taking Texans' land or part of it to build it?
Yes, we should build a wall, and yes, we should pay property owners fair compensation for the land that is taken for the law. You know, we have miles and miles of wall already on the border, and we've seen where the wall is built, illegal immigration goes down. And yet, you know, there's a reason the Democratic Party fights so hard against a wall. It's because, sadly, I think they've made a political determination that illegal immigration is in their interest. They think it's politically good for them. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I know it's bad for Texas. Every time I'm down on the border, I try to visit with Border Patrol agents. I try to visit with sheriffs and law enforcement. And I ask them, I say, okay, how much good does a wall do? And interestingly enough, they consistently say it does a lot of good, but it doesn't solve everything. You know, the old aphorism that if you build a 12-foot wall, somebody will come with a 13-foot ladder. Well, actually, law enforcement, Border Patrol agents tell me that's exactly true, that where they built walls, they had people coming across the Rio Grande that bring ladders. But the thing about it is, crossing the river with a ladder, running to get to the wall with a ladder slows you down. And one of the keys to stopping illegal immigration is the time between detection, when you spot someone crossing illegally, and interception, when the Border Patrol agents can go and apprehend them. And what a wall does is slows them down long enough that the Border Patrol agents can go and get them and stop them. We can solve this problem. Let me mention something else on a wall. A lot of Washington Democrats say, oh, a wall costs too much money. We can't spend the money it would take. Now, set aside, you know, ask yourself, when have Democrats in Washington ever thought anything costs too much money? I'm not sure I can think of another instance. But set that aside. I introduced legislation a couple of years ago called the El Chapo Act. The El Chapo Act would take money criminally forfeited from drug lords and use their money to build the wall. El Chapo alone, his global criminal empire has been estimated as high as $14 billion. Roughly the cost of building the wall just from one drug lord. And there is a sense of justice of taking the billions that these narco-terrorists have made crossing the border illegally, bringing narcotics across our border, bringing human beings across our border in horrific conditions, using their ill-gotten gains to build the wall. Now, doing that would cost not one penny of taxpayer money. And yet, Beto O'Rourke and the Democrats still oppose it. It's not about the money. It is they want the border to be open. And so you should ask yourself, do you agree with them? Beto O'Rourke has proposed that we should decriminalize crossing the border illegally, that we should make it not a crime to cross the border illegally. That is the very definition of open borders. That is a very popular position with liberal activists nationally. It's the sort of position that we saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, who won as a socialist, campaigning on abolish ICE. That's the same sort of position, but that's not where Texans are. Texans want to enforce our laws to keep our communities safe. That's what I fought to do every day in the Senate, and that's what I'll continue to fight to do.
On healthcare, months into your first term, you hosted a series of town halls, many of which I attended in that August break, advocating for the repeal and replacement of Obamacare. It's still in place, save for the individual mandate. With Republicans in power in both chambers and the White House, why hasn't it been repealed? Do you have a plan to repeal and replace?
Absolutely. Obamacare has hurt millions of Texans. It's proven to be a failure. Think back to when Obamacare was first passed. Obamacare was passed built on a mountain of lies. President Obama, you'll recall, looked in the TV camera and said, if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep your plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Millions of Americans discovered that wasn't true as their plans were canceled against their wills, as they lost the ability to see their doctors. PolitiFact, which leans very far to the left, described Obama's statement as 2013's lie of the year. The biggest reason, though, that so many Texans, so many Americans are unhappy with Obamacare is that it's made premiums skyrocket. As I've held town halls all over the state of Texas, every day women and men come up to me and say, I can't afford health insurance. I can't afford to care for my family. President Obama, in selling Obamacare, said under it the average family's premiums would drop $2,500 a year. Now, if that had proven correct, Obamacare might be popular today. But it didn't prove correct. In fact, the average family's premiums have risen over $5,000 a year. It isn't working. Now, how do you lower premiums? I think our number one focus in repealing Obamacare should be lowering premiums, making health insurance more affordable. How do you do that? More choices, more competition, more options, more consumer freedom. What does Obamacare do? Fewer choices, less competition, less option, less consumer freedom. Now, I've led the fight in the Senate every day I've been there to repeal Obamacare. Last year, we scored a major victory. We managed to repeal the Obamacare individual mandate. I led the fight to do that, and nobody thought we could do that last year. And then in December, we brought all 52 Republicans together and delivered on that promise. That was an important first step, but we need to finish the job. I'm committed to continuing to finish the job, to repealing Obamacare, to protecting pre-existing conditions, which everyone agrees pre-existing conditions will and must be protected, and doing so in a way that expands options, lowers premiums, and makes it easier for you and your family to purchase health insurance. Healthcare is another issue on which there is a stark divide between me and Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke supports Obamacare, and he wants to expand it to full-on socialized medicine to put the federal government in charge of your health care and your doctor. I think that'd be a mistake, and I don't think that's what most Texans want.
There was a report last weekend that President Trump's budget chief is worried you might not win this race, claiming likability still counts. What do you say to critics like that, and does likability count?
You know, in the past 2 weeks, we've done 19 town halls all over the state of Texas. We've been in East Texas, we've been in North Texas, we've been in West Texas, we've been in the Hill Country, we've been down on the Gulf Coast. We're seeing an energy, we're seeing a passion, we're seeing excitement. Look, I don't worry about what political guys in Washington say. I worry what Texans say. My job is to work for you. I have a job to work for 28 million Texans to fight night and day for lower taxes, lower regulations, more jobs, and to fight to protect your rights. That's a responsibility I take very seriously. And I'll tell you, as I travel the state, one of the things I hear all the time is Democrats come up to me and they'll say something like, you know, I didn't vote for you in 2012, but I'll say this, you're doing what you said you would do. And I have to point out as well, something we're seeing at all of these town halls, just about every town hall we do. 1, 2, 3, 4 people come up to me and say, I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life, but I'm with you now. And I think the reason is we've seen the National Democratic Party get so extreme. With the election of Donald Trump, National Democrats are angry. They're filled with rage and fury. They're adopting extreme positions, things like considering abolishing ICE or impeaching President Trump, both of which Beto O'Rourke agrees with. And for millions of conservative Democrats, millions of moderate Democrats here in the state of Texas, I think they're looking at the National Democrats and saying, there's no place for me in the party. And I will tell you, to all the conservative Democrats, to all the moderate Democrats, to all the independents, we welcome you with open arms. We will stand with you to defend your jobs, your economic liberty, and your constitutional rights. And I'm encouraged that we're seeing Texans come together behind our shared values.
Speaking of the president, your relationship with him has changed. I mean, on the campaign trail, you called him a liar, a coward. got personal with attacks, insulting your father, wife, and you famously refused to endorse him. Now things have obviously appeared to change. But what changed? When did it pivot?
There's no doubt 2016 was a rough election. It was an election unlike any others, and some hard shots were taken. But in my view, the entire universe changed in November of 2016, when the American people elected President Trump, elected Republican majorities in both houses. We suddenly had a unique opportunity. I got on a plane, I flew to New York City. I went to Trump Tower, I spent 4.5 hours with the President and his senior team, and I told him that day, I said, Mr. President, this is an historic moment. It is rare to have the opportunity to get the kind of policy victories we have in front of us. I said, I want to do everything humanly possible to lead the fight in the Senate, to deliver on our promises, to cut taxes, to cut regulations, to repeal Obamacare, to confirm strong constitutionalist judges to the Supreme Court and the federal courts. This opportunity to have a positive impact on Texas and our country is too important to do anything but roll up your sleeves and go to work. And for the last 2 years, I have spent just about every waking moment working to bring Republicans together, to get people on the same page, to unite, to deliver on our promises. And we've delivered beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Think back 2 years ago. Would anyone have imagined that it was likely we'd be sitting here today having passed an historic tax cut, seeing the lowest unemployment in decades, seeing the lowest African-American unemployment in history, the lowest Hispanic unemployment in history? Seeing on the national security and foreign policy front, the biggest rebuild of our military since Ronald Reagan. Seeing ISIS, we've utterly routed ISIS. They've lost virtually every square inch of the territory of the caliphate that they had seized. We are seeing the nation, seeing America's embassy in Israel in Jerusalem for the first time in 70 years, pulling out of Obama's disastrous Iranian nuclear deal. All of those were major, major victories for the safety and security of Texans, and also for the jobs and economic opportunity. So yes, of course, I work with the President. I work with the President closely and every day to deliver on policy and substance and results. And I think the people of Texas are seeing incredible victories as a result.
2020, just a couple more questions. Okay. Some have speculated that your opponent might be poised to run in 2020. Win or lose this Senate race, are you ready to run for president in 2020?
I am focused on the United States Senate. Obviously, in 2016, I had the blessing, the great privilege of running a presidential campaign. Heidi and I are grateful for that opportunity. It was an amazing journey. We came very close, but at the end of the day, the democratic process went a different direction, and I believe in democracy. Now, you're right that Congressman O'Rourke is spending a lot of time courting national support. Hollywood celebrities, Rosie O'Donnell, Ellen DeGeneres, Chelsea Handler, they're all in for Beto. He's got Joe Kennedy coming down from Massachusetts talking about how Beto O'Rourke might be the 2020 Democratic presidential nominee. Well, he can do all he wants, courting far-left liberals. My job's to represent Texas. 28 million Texans, your values, what you believe. And every time Beto O'Rourke embraces some position that makes the hearts of Hollywood liberals go pitter-pat, he's walking away from the values of Texans. When Beto says about NFL protesters protesting during the national anthem that he can think of nothing more American than taking a knee during the national anthem, I got to say to the millions of soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines who fought and bled and sometimes died for this country, I think that's just wrong. In Texas, we stand for the flag. We put our hand over our heart. If you're in uniform, you salute. And yes, you have a First Amendment right to speak, but you can do so in a way that isn't disrespectful to the flag and the national anthem.
Then can you commit to serving out your term?
You know, as we stand here today, the Texas Board of Education is getting ready to vote on a proposal, a recommendation they've received, to delete the word heroic from the description of the defenders of the Alamo. Let me just say that's sad. It's wrong. The kneeling at the anthem is part and parcel of the same political correctness on the left that tears down the institutions of Texas, tears down the institution of our country. You know, a new movie just came out with Neil Armstrong landing on the moon. And they decided to edit out the planting of the American flag on the moon. Well, it wasn't a United Nations flag that was planted there. It was the United States of America.
John F. Kennedy stood here in Houston and said, we're going to go to the moon. America's going to go to the moon. And all of this is part and parcel, whether it's erasing the American flag from the moon landing, or celebrating, protesting during the national anthem, or suggesting that we erase the heroism of Travis and Bowie and Crockett, the heroes of the Alamo. All of that's wrong. It is this left-wing progressivism that disrespects who we are as Texans and who we are as Americans. And I'm proud to defend Texas. I'll tell you, Travis's letter from the Alamo has hung in my office for 20 years. The very first time I spoke on the Senate floor, I read Travis's letter from the Alamo. Those are words that have stirred the hearts of little boys and little girls in Texas for over a century. And we shouldn't be erasing them from history. We should be standing up for who we are as Texans and Americans.
Two more quick questions.
We really have time.
Okay,
Yeah,
real quick.
We're way over time.
Okay, which of the two? Okay.
Do the
Yeah, so we have fun with this series and we try to have kind of a kicker. And we had two kickers potentially, but one is we found this picture of a young you and just wondering what advice you would give yourself, your younger self, if you could address yourself as Ted.
Have fun. Look, the advice that I give now to young people is follow your dreams. You know, I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of young people. It's one of the great things of serving in the Senate is that I speak with a lot of college kids, a lot of high school kids, and often they ask, what advice do you have for life? And the number one piece of advice I give is follow your dreams. Follow your passions. Think about when you go to bed at night. What is it you're thinking about? When you wake up in the morning, what is the first thought on your mind? Whatever your passion is, and it'll be different. For every one of us, it's something different. But whatever your passion is, do that. Follow that. Spend your life pursuing your passion. You'll be better at it. You'll do a much better job, and you'll be much happier.
And real quick, lots of mudslinging. Can you say anything nice about your opponent?
Well, as many of the press outlets have noted, I think he has very good hair.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
We'll be out of here.
We just have all those reporters standing out there.
Yeah,
Sure.
we appreciate it. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. Would you like to keep this?
No, that's all right.
He knows what he looks like.
I know.
Got it.